What's up everyone, we're back with my review of Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition. This was the first game completed in our CRPG marathon, and this is of course a review of the base game and not of the Siege of Dragonspear expansion, which will be coming a little on down the road. Originally released in 1998 and remastered in 2012, Baldur's Gate is the first game on the now legendary Infinity Engine. It operates on a heavily modified Dungeons & Dragons 2.0 and has been further optimized for modern-day machines by the re-release. Baldur's Gate is of course a classic CRPG or computer role-playing game. And while a computer RPG can mean a number of things now, back in 1998, it was referring to a specific genre. This typically meant top-down view, click to select and move, a fantasy setting, D&D or D&D inspired rule set, and a nice mix of deep storytelling and dungeon crawling content. The first thing that people tend to notice about Baldur's Gate is how well the Infinity Engine is holding up. Now this is largely the result of optimization through the Enhanced Edition. There's full support for modern day high definition resolutions, and you can even scale the HUD to your resolution so it's not tiny once everything has been stretched out. Sure, if you zoom all the way in, you'll end up with a bit of a pixelated mess, but from a reasonable distance out, the graphics are pretty solid. The artwork and aesthetic within Baldur's Gate has always been just stunning. If anyone has one of those old Lords of the Ring maps of Middle-earth or a cloth map that used to come with games like EverQuest, it's as if you're looking right into one of those and playing directly on top of it. The style may not be for everyone, but you can tell a lot of time and effort was put into creating these environments. This is a fairly heavy contrast to some other games. We're going to use Neverwinter Nights as an example. That was a game made on the Aurora engine, which was the supposed successor to the Infinity Engine, but it focused on rendering everything in 3D with real-time lighting. Rather than the strong artwork, the game chose to pursue cutting-edge graphics. Now that decades have passed, looking back at both games, Baldur's Gate still looks good. Even if you were to install the non-enhanced version of the game, the HUD would look a lot worse, but the game's artwork would still be visually pleasing. Whereas Neverwinter Nights is very difficult to look at. Once the modern aspects of the engine have been stripped away by time, there's not much left. It's a game that's difficult for a lot of people to go back and play just because it looks awful. I'm rambling, but bottom line is Baldur's Gate looks good, the Infinity Engine is holding up. Even if you're someone that typically shies away from older games due to low quality graphics and older engines, give Baldur's Gate a shot. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Moving on to gameplay, Baldur's Gate really paved the way for future CRPG titles in terms of control scheme and flow of combat. It uses dice rolls for everything, but it's done entirely in real time. You'll notice a lot of the stats, like attacks per round or spell duration X turns, and it can be a little difficult to translate these in real time, but it's not that big of a deal. The combat seems pretty seamless, and during this particular playthrough, I didn't run into any noticeable bugs, nothing that really seemed out of place or negatively affected gameplay. And of course, one of the big influences felt on later games, including modern games, RPGs and CRPGs, is the real-time with pause. You can pause the game at any point and queue up actions for your characters to use in the coming turns. This is seen a lot in modern games like Dragon Age, the modern CRPGs, things like Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny, games like those. Another thing worth mentioning is D&D 2.0 is also a very, very solid version of Dungeons & Dragons. I've heard that there's still a pretty big community of people playing it on tabletop. And while I've never played 2.0 outside of video games, the rule set seems to translate to the platform very well. One of the biggest issues I and some people I know have had playing Baldur's Gate is attempting to pick a class. They're all fun. I mean, this is a good problem to have, but it's a real problem. Melee combat is fun. You get a lot of direct control, and classes like Fighter and Paladin scale really well. So it's fun to walk around with this big powerhouse. There are also so many spells, and they're all really unique and cool. Sometimes it feels hard to justify not playing a caster just because there's so much you can do with spells, especially when you start to get into high levels in Baldur's Gate 2, but even in the first game, there's just so much variety. There's also mix and match multi-classing, dual classing, and tons of hybrid classes as well. No matter what kind of character you want to play, the game has you covered. This is an advantage, but it can also be a disadvantage just because, you'll play 10 hours into the game and then you'll be like, man, it would have been really cool to be a druid. And then I have this problem, my friends do too, where we'll just want to start over, and then you get so far in again, you're like, well, but the fighter was really cool, and you start playing him again, and then you're like, but Paladin's great too, and It's rough. It's rough when all of the options are fun and great. The Enhanced Edition also brings a lot of the improvements from Baldur's Gate 2 into the first game. This means you've got a lot more available spells and abilities, a few different class restrictions, and most importantly, the addition of class kits. For anyone who doesn't know, class kits are like specialized subclasses you pick during character creation. You might lose some of your class abilities or have further armor and weapon restrictions to gain bonuses the class may not normally have. For instance, the Avenger kit for Druid gets a constitution penalty on character creation, but learns several mage spells and new shapeshifting forms. The class kits add a lot of depth and strategy to the combat system. Unfortunately, the original game wasn't really tuned for some of the bonuses you get. So if you pick a certain class and kit combination, you're gonna have a much easier time. You can steamroll the game with some of the abilities you get from kits. If you find the game a bit too easy, they've added a special difficulty mode called Legacy of Baal. This difficulty is unique in the fact that once you choose it, you can't unchoose it. Normally the difficulty can be swapped at any time in the gameplay options, but Legacy of Baal is an all or nothing deal. I've seen some debate online about whether or not Legacy of Baal was meant to be New Game Plus, or if it's just designed for super min-maxing and cheese strats. I guess you can do it either way, but yeah, it's not the sort of difficulty you can just sit down and play through. I've beaten the game with several difficulty mods before, and nothing has even come close to Legacy of Baal. I believe the formula for enemy HP in Legacy of Baal is 3 times normal plus 80, which is insane because the flat plus 80 is 2 to 3 times more than most of the monsters are going to have. Enemies also seem to do a lot more damage. The first hobgoblin I ran into on Legacy of Baal killed a 19 Constitution half-orc fighter with a single shot from his bow. Anyway, if you're a hardcore power gamer looking for a crazy challenge, this mode has become available. Achievements were also added to the game. I personally have never been much of an achievement hunter, but you know, it's always fun to set little extra goals for you and your party, things to try to attain. You know, it's fun to get the achievement. And now that we've talked a lot about setup, let's get on to the game itself. The original Baldur's Gate is a great game with a great story, just flat out, but it does have some flaws. First off, the scope of the game is really small, and what I mean by that is you play these old CRPGs and you're usually on some monumental quest from the get-go, and by the end of the game, what you're doing here is definitely important, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't really feel like it. When I think back at how I spent most of my time in this game, it's a lot of quests like Joshua and the Bear. This is mostly a small thematic complaint, but compared to the rest of the series, Siege of Dragonspear included, it just doesn't quite feel as epic. While the story of Baldur's Gate is good and reasonably well written, the storytelling itself could use a little work. Most of the plot is presented to you in the form of either notes and books that you need to read, or journal updates where your character voices his or her opinion on the current events. It makes it a bit tedious to keep up with the plot. You can figure out what's going on just by where you are and what you're doing, but when it comes to the real meat of the story, it's nothing, bam, big wall of text. The rest of the series improves upon this greatly, giving you a good mix of scrolls, dialogue, and character interaction. The story is much more spread out, and I don't have a problem with reading. I'm a fan of games that have lots of text for you to read and get the feel of, but this is presented to you in just these small font, huge walls of text. It's less about there being too much text and more about there being too much text from each individual source and not enough sources. The story doesn't seem to be presented to you organically. It doesn't seem to flow from the world. It's just these kind of mindless journal entries. The companions are unique and memorable, but don't offer much in the way of gameplay enhancement. They might give you a single side quest, which you had access to anyway, and a couple lines of dialogue when you meet them, and then again when you complete that, quest. But for the majority of the game, they're just going to be well-voiced, controllable cronies. This is an area where the game really falls short. Base Baldur's Gate doesn't have the witty and interesting banter between characters. You don't go on these large epic side quests with them. You just kind of recruit them and call it a day. This is improved upon with the Siege of Dragonspear characters they added to the base campaign. Well, I guess it's just the Enhanced Edition characters, but the ones Beamdog added are a little bit better, but they're still kind of rough around the edges. Some of them have interesting backstories that you can ascertain through these small bits of dialogue, and maybe what they're wearing in item lore, but you're really not going to be presented with it. On this last playthrough, which I did on stream, I actually soloed the game as a bounty hunter, and I really didn't feel like I missed out on big parts of it by skipping the whole party aspect. If anything, the added challenge and tactics I had to use were a plus. This is a big contrast to other classic CRPGs, where not taking party members just feels like a huge blow to the game. You feel like you miss out on so much. The game's campaign is either pretty long or pretty short, depending on how you want to go about it. There's enough side quests and things to stretch out the game into the 100-ish hour realm if you really wanted to, but a lot of the side quests can be hard to find and are a bit tedious. I shouldn't say that, that's a bit negative. There's some really good and memorable side quests in here. Definitely a lot worth doing, but periodically you're gonna run into something that's like, go next door, kill one bandit, and come back to me and turn it in, and next door will end up being 7 zones away, and all you get from it is 200 experience and 50 gold, which is what you get from, you know, killing a skeleton outside. I've tried to do full completion runs before, or at least as close as you can get in a single run. There are a couple of mutually exclusive quests, and I'm usually just burnt out by about 75% of the way through. Once you stop leveling and aren't really getting rewards, the seemingly endless quest found within Baldur's Gate gets real old real fast. None of the rewards are showstoppers either. The items have a pretty low cap because, you know, the game's experience level is set to a certain point and they don't want you getting much more powerful than that. There is some bit of replayability, but not as much as you'd find in other CRPGs. Just a few points where the quest goes through big deviations, and to be honest, they lead to the same place. The variety really comes from the different classes, the kits, the difficulties, and the compositions you have going through the adventure. All in all, Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition is a great game. If you've never played Baldur's Gate or couldn't get into it because of the archaic UI, pick this one up. It's not the greatest CRPG ever made. If you're looking for something with endless depth, there are some better options. I'm glad I picked this one up and I've had a blast playing it. Oh, and I almost forgot, you can import your character directly into Baldur's Gate 2, which might actually be the greatest CRPG ever made. So if you want to make it a truly epic saga, pick them both up and take one guy just straight through. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and lightly tap that motherfucking like button and subscribe for more objective gaming content. I'll see everyone next time.